Which one do you want me to read? I will do whatever. I'm going to accept whatever. Hmm. So right now, that's another failure in the recognition of civil rights progress for African American communities. There was a young guy named Jacob Blake who was mentally unstable. Maybe it was real the reason why he slashed the knife in the first place. That was real the case. But however, he was shot more than 7 times because of that fatal incident right beneath his waist. He was paralyzed. There was no chance he would regain mobility by moving his legs properly. However, the prosecutor who's been in charge of the case, named Michael Gravely, announced that there will be no prosecution, and the officer who had been involved with the case is not going to face criminal charges. Definitely, Michael Gravely is a person who lamented the tragedy of this event. None of them would be brought to justice because the cases are going to be dropped. Even the African American victim, as well as the perpetrator who resisted the initial trial of apprehension by the police officers, is not going to face any criminal charges. So both of them are going to be saved from the prosecution. However, what's been so visceral here is, just like the sentiment shared by the lawyers representing Mr. Blakeman and his families, represented by a lawyer, Ben Crump. This is, immense disappointment. They were immensely disappointed. That's really the sentiment shared by lawyers representing Mr. Jacob Blakeman and his family. Do you remember the Ben Crump guy? He was always at the center stage of Black Lives Matter litigations. He represented Mike Brown, and he was also part of the Trayvon Martin case, if my understanding is correct. But the problem is, there will be no further inquiry into his case. Because, following from the initial understanding, there was a heavy resistance demonstrated by the Mr. Blakeman, who even actually carried a knife. So there was a reasonable deduction by police officer who decided to shoot him. But there had been a certain altercation in between. And some people doubt that the police officer relied on abusive forces to bring him down because, 1 or 2 shot would be enough to have him sustained or controlled, right? Anyway, there will be no prosecutorial efforts by pressing charges on the officer named Rickertine. Yeah, there will be no further inquiry into the case. However, the deadly consequence will stay with Mr. Blakeman forever. Because, underneath his torso, starting from his waist until the end of his body. He remains paralyzed. He's not going to regain mobility. He just simply lost his kinetic mobility. There will be no chance he would be ambulatory ever again. That's an unfortunate event. And that eventually triggered the frustration inside the black community. Again, people were devastated to hear this type of miscarriage of justice again. And this is really another extension of the Black Lives Matter movement, for sure. The same story with a different victim. But at this time, there has been a little recognition of the liability by the black perpetrator because he allegedly carried a knife and he at some point wielded it. There was a witness testimony on behalf of the law enforcement. That's really the case. Of course I can understand that.